Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I want to thank my latest Patreon subscriber, Jay Hall, for his support and all my Patreon subscribers for their continued support. This podcast would struggle to continue without them, and my Patreon page is quickly becoming a great place to hang out and talk about the world of conducting. There will be more about my Patreon page later on in the episode. Today, I conduct a conversation with an American conductor who's at the start of his career, but has achieved so much already. He's been the assistant conductor of the San Francisco Symphony and is currently the conducting fellow of the New World Symphony in Miami. He was also the founder of an extremely innovative group called the Elevate Ensemble. It's a real pleasure to welcome Chad Goodman. Chad, lovely to see you today. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm currently in Miami Beach, where I work with the New World Symphony, and it is entirely too beautiful for this time of year.
It's a lot more beautiful than where I am, though I love my city. So, I'm not complaining, but yeah, Miami Beach sounds like a very nice place to be at Christmas time. I always go back and ask you about your earliest musical experiences. I can find no recollection or notice anywhere online about what instruments you played, other than I found a picture of you holding a trumpet on Google. So I wonder whether the trumpet was your main instrument or whether you were just taking part in some weird photo setup. And when music came into your world, are you a musical family? How did it start?
Yes, trumpet is my main instrument. I started playing trumpet when I was 8 years old, and in public school at the age of 9, everyone gets to pick an instrument. Cool. And so I started a little bit ahead of time in settling on trumpet because my father had played trumpet when he was a kid. And he actually did it very seriously up through his college years. And he never went into it professionally, but it was honestly the biggest passion in his life. Yeah. And my grandfather as well played trumpet. Both my father and my grandfather ended up founding small businesses and running businesses. But my grandfather ran a big band during the big band era here in the States. And then my father played in, classical music. He was playing in symphonies. He was playing in rock bands. He sort of grew up in that golden age when playing trumpet was very hip to everyone. I ended up growing up a little bit later where it was just a nerdy band thing again,
Yeah, so he grew up in the Herb Alpert sort of stage, did he?
Absolutely did. And so I picked up the trumpet at age 8, and my father actually picked up the trumpet after decades of not touching it and started playing again. And he was my first teacher for my first year. And I really took a liking to it, and I maybe had some more natural abilities on the instrument. And so my father agreed to get me private lessons. So I actually started studying a jazz trumpet. I didn't even start in the classical world. I was studying with a lead trumpet player who played all the musicals coming through Washington, D.C. and the Baltimore area where I grew up. And he was the lead player in the Navy Commodore's jazz band. So my whole musical upbringing was actually in jazz, and it didn't shift into classical until a little bit later.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask, who was going to win the day, the grandfather in his big band world or your father in his sort of orchestral world. But it sounds like the grandfather sort of won for a while. I'm not sure I've spoken to anybody who really actually started straight away in the jazz world before anything else. Is there anything from that world that you still use today on a regular basis?
Yeah, and oddly enough, or perhaps it's not odd, I've found that in interviews and talking with other conductors and arts administrators that it becomes something that stands out quite a bit compared to a lot of other conductors. And I think it trained me to play music and internalize music by feel very quickly, because what's written on the page isn't necessarily how it's played. And that's the beauty and curse of jazz and why it can be a challenge to work with an orchestra on something like, let's swing this. What does that even mean? Because what's written on the page is not how you play it. And so I grew up learning all of these different styles of playing and ways of reinterpreting what is printed and how can I change that into something else. I also grew up doing a bit of improvisation, which has always helped me. I found more and more, and I think it's put me at ease in certain situations, and sight reading and all these other things that I think can cause a lot of tension for musicians. I think there was so much of my upbringing that was just go with the flow. That it's aided me in sort of loosening things up in the classical world.
So when did the classical world, you said you switched at a later date or became interested in it at a later date. When did it first come in? And I'm assuming that would be, it shows how little I know about jazz, but that would be when you first really met a conductor, i.e. what the world perceives to be a conductor, somebody dressed in a tux holding a baton.
Yes. So I think my story is not unique in that it was playing in a youth orchestra. My introduction to playing in a youth symphony was the Maryland Youth Symphony Orchestra, which I auditioned for at age 13 and got accepted into. And the music director was, at that time, especially as a kid, everyone's old to you, but he felt particularly old. You know, he was this Italian gentleman named Angelo Gatto. He had been a violinist with the Pittsburgh Symphony in like the 40s and 50s. And he was the director for decades of the Maryland Youth Symphony. And I had never encountered anyone like him. I had growing up in America. It's a band tradition, right? So I grew up playing in wind ensembles and symphonic bands. And so this was my first time ever playing with strings. I never had the opportunity until this youth orchestra to sit in the same room with string players. And working with this man was just unbelievable. He was so inspiring. I had never met someone so passionate about music. And I mean, you know, an old Italian man to, you know, be passionate about music. And of course, the repertoire was all the greats. It was it was Mozart, it was Verdi, it was Beethoven, Berlioz, just all the core repertoire. And he was inspiring and at the same time unintentionally hilarious because he was so serious, right? He's working with all these young musicians, but he's working with us like we're a professional orchestra. And if, you know, someone makes a mistake, he would just start saying prayers for that person in Italian, just muttering it.
I like that. Oh dear.
Yeah. And so this became my gateway into classical music. And it was the first time I ever got goosebumps making music. My first year there, we were playing Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. And I remember just being so overwhelmed with the communal aspect of making music with all these other young musicians who were sacrificing their Saturday morning instead of playing with friends, playing football, doing whatever, that we were meeting in this, you know, college orchestra rehearsal room and making music. And so that was the turning point. And I decided I'm going to be an orchestral trumpet player. That was my goal. At 13, if you asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, that was it.
Ditto for me at the age of 14. You did make me think of a question. Which I'm not sure I've asked before, about somebody who we first encounter, youth orchestra conductors or amateur orchestra conductors. And frankly, there are some professional conductors you could level this at who are ex-string players. Did he maybe over obsess on the strings and the string sound? And, you know, the woodwind and brass would sit there for 25 minutes and do literally nothing. I remember the first time I worked with my amateur orchestra in Birmingham, they were so pleased when I actually involved them every, 5 or 10 minutes or so, compared to others they'd had who just obsessed, and they'd sit there and think, I haven't played for 25 minutes and this is my hobby. Was he a good overall person? He dealt with everybody and didn't fuss too much over the string playing.
He definitely fussed over the string playing. But he was very good about including all of us. And the way our rehearsals were scheduled was the first hour of rehearsal was always a sectional. It was brass sectional, a woodwind sectional, and he led the string sectional always. So he got his nitpicking in with just strings alone. But there was, it was definitely an experience as a young musician coming into the orchestral world, which I was very unfamiliar with, to like show up. And I think the first program I was playing on, we did Schubert Unfinished. And it was something like, as a trumpet player playing second trumpet on that, I think there was one point where I had to count like 155 bars of rest. And it's like, it's, you learn quickly what the roles are, and how trumpet, coming from the jazz world and band world, where it's trumpet's melody, trumpet's everything. That's the lead voice, to like, no, sometimes you tacit entire movements or pieces, so for an entire program, I don't even play the concerto. And as a young kid, that was really strange to me.
Yes. I'm going to ask a question which, now with two people's different words. Håkan Hardenberger, now the trumpet player, called it stick poison. And my old mate Pete Hill, the timpanist of the CBSO and the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra for many, many, many years, called it stickitis. When did you take your first draft of stick poison, and why? What was there something that made you think, you know what, I'd really quite like to stand in front of everybody and wave my arms around?
Yeah, for me, I don't have the traditional story. I don't have the Dudamel, like conducting my stuffed animals in my room as a child kind of tale. For me, I was really set on I wanted to be principal trumpet of the New York Philharmonic. That was my big goal, my future goal. And so through my bachelor's degree, which I got at the Eastman School of Music in New York, I was still set on being a trumpet player. And I even for graduate studies moved to San Francisco to study trumpet. Yeah. But during the first week that I was in grad school, I was walking down the hall and I locked eyes with this one of the professors. And it was one of those where like, we both knew that we knew each other, but we had no idea from where. And so we stopped and we started chatting. And it turned out he had been a guest conductor with the Eastman Wind Ensemble when I was playing with that group in undergrad. And he had just started at San Francisco State, directing the wind ensemble there. And so I was playing in his groups. And within the first 2 weeks or so, we had really hit it off. I would just go chat with him in his office. And he pulled me aside one day and he was just like, I really enjoy your musicality on the trumpet, and I love talking music with you. I just have a feeling you could make a fine conductor. If you'd be interested, I'd be happy to provide you with free lessons.
Wow.
And so I had no desire, still at this point, age 22 in grad school, trumpet was my future. But I thought, I respect this musician. He sees something in me. And I know that studying, I was already at that point, I'd study some scores. I'd look at them to see how the trumpet part fit in. So I thought, well, getting better at this can only help my trumpet playing. So I'll say yes. So I started weekly private lessons in conducting with this man. His name was Martin Zegelka. He's a German conductor. And I fell in love with it. And by the second semester, I became the assistant conductor. And that was my first time getting to stand in front of a full ensemble. And I was hooked. I was hooked.
You've been called an assistant conductor with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. You're conducting fellow at the New World Symphony Orchestra in Miami now, but you've also been a cover conductor. Now, there's three things there. You think, well, that's just semantics, Mike. They're just words, but they are subtly different jobs, aren't they? So could you take us through what being an assistant is versus being a cover conductor is versus being a conducting fellow? It's probably a very long answer, and I'm happy to hear the answer, but I'm sorry to make it such a long question. But they are so subtly different, don't you think?
Yes, yeah, they are, and I think it depends. It's a case-by-case situation.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So I will say that as an assistant conductor with the San Francisco Symphony, I was brought in, I think, maybe 5 seasons ago to assist guest conductors exclusively. Right. They had at the time a staff conductor position, which most orchestras would probably refer to as the assistant conductor, but there the titled role was resident conductor. Right. And the resident conductor, I know, to add another word.
A fourth strand, yeah.
Their resident conductor was responsible for running the youth orchestra, kids concerts, education programming, and then being the cover / assisting the music director and the conductor laureate, who was Herbert Blomstedt. Yeah. And so all of the guest conducting weeks, which of course is the majority of the season, they would have other conductors like myself be the assistant. So I was the cover conductor. As the assistant conductor in San Francisco, I am a cover conductor. I'm also assisting in any and every way, whether that's giving balance, whether that's helping with lighting cues. If there was going to be some sort of extra things, I know you're very familiar with, maybe you're calling video cues or something like that. Yeah. So basically it's, you offer your services in relation to the conductor in any way possible.
So also off stage, if that you happen to be needed off stage for some.
Exactly. My very first week, my very first day, I ended up getting to conduct on offstage, the offstage banda. It was in Alpine Symphony. And so Daniel Harding was conducting, and the way that he was doing, it's the typical backstage. They have the tiny little TV monitor and, ancient TV monitor, and the brass ensemble off stage would use that. Well, Daniel, when he was doing this, was taking a little bit more time. There was more rubato in this offstage section, and the 14 brass players crammed in the back alleyway, couldn't tell what was going on, couldn't hear what was going on. And so I was sort of like, in the second half of the first rehearsal, the head of the artistic department of the symphony came out and said, "Chad, how are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm doing well. This is great. I'm so excited to be here." And he was like, Good. How would you feel about conducting the offstage? And I said, "Oh, sure, like tomorrow." And he went, "Oh, no, like right now." And they were like, they were like 2 rehearsal numbers away from the offstage. Like Daniel's rehearsing. He has no idea this is happening, but the brass players at break had approached administration and said, we don't know what's going on. We need someone back here. Right. So I just sort of got thrown into it. And so day one, I actually got to stand in front of, an extraordinary group of brass players with the San Francisco Symphony. And though it's a small part, you also, it's one of those things that you can't necessarily win over people by being a great offstage conductor, but you can sure as hell ruin things for yourself if it doesn't go well.
Absolutely. There are 2 things to bring up about that. Is that, you mentioned the fact that you have a tiny little monitor, which is in black and white, grainy view. And the listener might be thinking, well, why doesn't, surely these days we can have a nice big digital flat screen. And the reason why is that the technology doesn't seem to yet exist for the picture to be instantaneous on a digital flat screen picture of what there's a lag. It's about half a second to a second lag. And I've done opera at the Conservatory in Birmingham, where the orchestra is at the back of the stage, and so the singers are singing everything off the monitor. And they brought in all of these wonderful flat screen things, and there was a delay, and we had to just go and get some old black and white, huge Cathay ray tube things in grey boxes that look ugly and disgusting, but it's the only way because it's instant, it's instantaneous. And that's why you sit in the dark in various corners of various concert halls as an offstage conductor looking at a grainy black and white TV screen. The other story I must tell you is that when I did the Alpine Symphony with the CBSA Youth Orchestra, we did it in Symphony Hall, Birmingham. And we had very early discussions about who to use for the 12 offstage horns, the 2 offstage trumpets, and the 2 offstage trombones. I think that's the right numbers. And I decided it might be nice to see if we could get people from all of the local youth and amateur orchestras to come and play. So I put a Facebook post up and said, if you fancy playing in the offstage group for the Alpine Symphony next, whenever it was, send me a message on Facebook. We ended up that night, one of the horn players went ill, so we ended up with 23 offstage horns, 4 offstage trumpets and 3 offstage trombones. And I've got a video somewhere that somebody videoed it from his music stand as one of the 23 horn players, and it's the most disgusting yet exciting sound I think you'll ever hear.
Unforgettable.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I put them up on the very highest level, out the back of the back doors of Symphony Hall, of the audience, and so their sound was going into the mall, the public mall. It was ringing around, and it actually sounded inside the hall like they were in the next valley, which is what I would think it should sound like, rather than in the valley you're in, climbing up the mountain. It sounded like they were either the other side of the mountain or in the next valley. But yeah, I mean, up close, that sound is truly awful. And we had Alpesh Chauhan, who's been on the podcast. He was conducting. But yeah, offstage is such a tricky thing, isn't it? I've done it,
Yeah, it's a very difficult role, and something that, once again, people don't think necessarily much of.
No.
But like I said, I think it is, as I alluded to, is something I came across in trumpet auditions when I was still doing, pursuing that professionally while I was building my conducting career. I was still playing and taking auditions. And I remember for me, it was Beethoven's Leonore Overture No. 3, the offstage trumpet call. Speaking of offstage,
yeah,
it's the B flat major arpeggio. And I remember someone explained it to me as, this is an excerpt that you can't win an audition with this, but you can lose an audition with this. And that's how I feel about any and all offstage conducting. is if it's done well, people will not know that there's a conductor involved at all.
Absolutely true. I'm assuming, I know you added the fourth strand, the resident conductor, but I'm assuming really cover conductor, assistant conductor in the role that you were in, you're not actually going to get much conducting other than off stage. Whereas conducting fellow, which is where you are now, you started fairly recently, I think, at the New World Symphony in Miami. You are getting conducting and you're getting major stuff. So do you still have any roles in assisting as a conducting fellow? Do you now go and assist the music director?
Yeah, I do that as well. So my responsibilities as conducting fellow at New World are much more hands-on. I'm, in addition to running all of the education and family concerts, outreach programming, and building all of that and conducting all of that, I also have the opportunity here to share subscription concerts with our music director, Michael Tilson Thomas, as well as many of the guest conductors. So I'm getting to actually share the podium with all of these extraordinary musicians that are coming through. And on top of that, I'm actually the cover for the whole season. So it's wow. Actually everything. It's very, very busy, we'll say. This season in particular is a bit of a doozy. I think I'll be conducting on 16 different programs this season here at New World, which is incredible. I mean, it would be difficult to find an assistant role where there's that much consistent podium time. I mean, I think I'll be conducting every week of January and February. So, it might be one piece. It might be the overture on a subscription, or it might be an education program or a run out concert, whatever it is. But it's, I get my hands dirty in this position, which is exactly what I need, because you spend all of that time. I think for a lot of people, particularly in the States, assistant conducting roles, cover conducting, it's such a common stepping stone. And it's where I learned everything, honestly. Yeah. Watching rehearsals is the greatest thing. I will never be upset with that. As much as I want to, of course, be the one on the podium, the more time I have to watch conductors I admire or conductors that aren't successful, the more time I have to observe, the better I'm going to be, through the future. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the perfect mixture. The fact that you're conducting a piece in every concert and you're sticking around to watch the guests and MTT, the music director, you're still watching rehearsals, which, even at the age of 51, and I've been conducting professionally now, getting on for 20 years, I still quite enjoy going and sitting and watching somebody else rehearse. And like you said, you're learning from some of the greats and you're learning from some of the not so greats. And there are still things to learn, but to actually have that much podium time is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It says that you started in San Francisco in 2018 as the assistant. When did Elevate Ensemble happen? Was that before, during, after? When did it start? And then we'll get to talk about what Elevate Ensemble is or was.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, when I was in grad school is where I was introduced to conducting. And through this period and the years following my graduate studies, I was playing trumpet professionally in the San Francisco Bay Area. There were a tremendous number of orchestras. So I was freelancing consistently with 5 or 6 orchestras. I had a private trumpet studio of up at most, I think, 22 students I was teaching a week. And on top of that, I knew that I wanted to do more conducting. This is the path I wanted to go down. I didn't want any more academia, though. Like I didn't want to be in school. I didn't want to be, have more student loans to pay off in the future, which is an abysmal thing here to deal with. And so I thought, I'm already freelancing professionally as a trumpet player. I would say I took this, the Field of Dreams mentality. I don't know if you remember that film, the baseball film. Yeah. Where there was the famous quote was, if you build it, they will come, about building a baseball stadium. I thought, well, if I put together a group, I can hire all my friends, if I can pay them, of course, why would they turn that down? And they know me, we have good rapport already. So why not? And so I decided I'll found my own professional ensemble. And from the start, I knew I'm going to have to be able to raise money for this, which, things I had never done. I went to music school and graduate school for trumpet performance, and picked up conducting along the way. But I knew I could only do this if I could pay everyone. This can't be a pro bono kind of gig thing, or that's a one-off if it is. So I thought I can't form an orchestra, so I'll form an ensemble. So I thought flexible instrumentation, pieces like, L'Histoire or the Stravinsky Octet, Schoenberg Chamber Symphony, I could change the number of players based on even how much money I have, And so I put together a group that we did our first show. I rented out a yoga studio in sort of the suburbs of San Francisco and used this as a venue. And my big piece was Dvorak's Serenade for Winds. Mm-hmm. And I was friends with some local composers. I paid out of pocket for everything for the first program. This was just, I need to get things off the ground. And so I commissioned a very short fanfare piece to open. And it was a mixed bag. There was a short work, a chamber symphony by Millot. There was a mixed septet by Martinu called Le Ronde, which is beautiful. And then I had a few of these two new music works and Dvorak Wind Serenade. And putting this together was just the greatest lesson I ever had in music business, because I marketed everything. I programmed everything. I commissioned it. I realized how much of a pain it is to try and get, in this case, I think I used a total of 13 freelance musicians to agree and commit to a rehearsal schedule and performance schedule, let alone to just even respond to an email. Like, you learn about dealing with people very quickly. Renting a venue. I had to rent chairs. It's a yoga studio. It's not a concert venue. I had to rent chairs. So I had to rent a van to pick up chairs from another part of the city, drive that out, set up all of the chairs myself, tear it all down after the concert. So it was a one-person show, so to speak, but I had nearly 100 people show up for this show in a yoga studio that was primarily contemporary music on the outskirts of the city. And so I thought, this went very well. Like, I'm doing something right. And so I just need to figure it out. And so from there, I put together an advisory board of people who were much more knowledgeable than I was, and people that were excited about my vision. And it turned into this very successful organization, which I credit for everything. I gained all of my conducting experience through this group because it was mine. That was the beauty. I conducted everything. I picked every piece. I wrote the program notes. I talked to the audience. So I learned all the skills that you need as a conductor. I just got to do with my own group, and the victories could feel like they were mine, and the failures were mine also.
Before we go on to what it means to run something like that, and what potentially this means for the future for young conductors like yourself and those who want to be conductors, I'm going to ask you a question which has popped into my head, and because of something you said right back at the beginning, as a passing comment. Do you think, or did you actually speak to your father and your grandfather, who were both, as you said, set up small businesses and ran them successfully themselves? Did you gain anything from them? And if so, what? Or do you think, there's something in the bones of being brought up by, a father or a grandfather who were entrepreneurs? Did you gain anything from them?
What a great question. No one's asked me this. Yeah, so absolutely. Particularly from my father, I found our relationship got even closer because of this, because he was running it was a paper and janitorial supplies company. So nothing, the furthest thing from music, but he was a small business owner. Yeah. And all of a sudden, instead of chatting, I lived on the other side of the country, all those years. I lived in San Francisco 8 years. Instead of chatting once a week, we'd be talking several times a week. And it might be, Dad, how do I boost the morale of my musicians? Or how do I get these people to call me back? Or how do I negotiate? How do I make an ask for something? And so I think it actually made my relationship with my dad stronger. And it just added so much value to what I was doing and to my connection with my family. So well, I've never been asked that. Yeah.
Well, it just popped into my head thinking, well, obviously the trumpet playing side of your family rubbed off, and you wonder whether the entrepreneur side did. I read about Elevate, and it's, you had collaborations with photographers, videographers, poets, culinary artists, which I'm very intrigued by, somebody who loves his food. It sounds like, we have a mutual friend, David Taylor, who calls himself an arts entrepreneur. I would say that there is now a substrata to this, which is the conductor entrepreneur, those who set up their own ensembles with a different skew on things. It's not just an orchestra that lives in a hall and plays, classical music in inverted commas. You're doing mixtures of programs with collaborating with different people. Do you think that's something that, more conductors should do? And going forward, how important for a conductor in the future do you think social media is? And, I'm on most of them because you have to be sort of, and sometimes you can feel a slave to it. But how do you think that young conductors, conductors 10 years younger than you, just starting out right now, need to think in the future? Or do you think they can just do it the old-fashioned way still?
I don't think they can. I think very few will be able to do it the old-fashioned way. I think that starting a group, like I said, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah. That's the reason I'm actually doing this as a career now. But it gave me so much life experience. It gave me so much conducting experience. All these interpersonal, people skills. It's something I've encouraged. I have a few conducting students, and I've had some that have been quite successful in doing this. And it doesn't mean starting a not-for-profit organization and going all in. But I had a student who was in undergrad. It was a vocalist, and he knew he wanted to get into conducting, but he wasn't able to take the conducting courses or do everything at the university. And so I said, get to know everyone, all the other students. You have the luxury of being in academia, AKA everyone's going to be willing. You can buy a round of pizzas and beer, and that's payment for students, and get as many people together and just do repertoire readings and set up your video camera, and you're going to film it and you're going to send me the footage, and we're going to address what you're doing. And he did this for several years. And now he just assisted on an opera production in France. And like, he's doing it, and he doesn't have a conducting degree. He gained all of this from just putting together like weekly reading sessions with other students. And so it doesn't have to be, you're going to form a professional arts organization. Had I known how difficult it was going to be, I probably would not have done what I did, but I just kind of went in blindly with the goal of, I need more conducting experience. I don't want to go to school for it. So I need to get hands-on with this. So I guess I'll create it. And that was just the start. That was the catalyst for everything. So I think it's a great plan.
I think what you did is would appeal to me much more than the academic side. You can talk about conducting and look at pictures and whatever else. In the end, the best thing to do is go out and do it. And so setting up your own ensemble and just doing it, and then having to learn all the other stuff to make it work, then fine,
Yeah. And following up on that, Mike, the thing that was so important, I think, was getting to start in the hot seat, so to speak, like getting to conduct every piece on a program, having to make all of these executive decisions. That's a rare thing. Usually you start, you're an assistant, you're observing, you're a cover conductor. You're not getting to do much. You work with a youth orchestra, which I love doing, by the way, but like, I'm not talking, but like there's usually stages. And so to have to start by being the face of an organization, no matter how small it may be, I think it was really important for me. Yeah. And I think it could provide a lot of value for a lot of other young conductors to, also see, like, is this something I would be interested in trying to pursue for the rest of my life? Because frankly, those are skills that, as a music director, principal conductor, all of these other things that have nothing to do with conducting are going to be part of your life, a very large part of your life. And so learning about this right away, I think is very important.
Now, I can see ways of collaborating with photographers and videographers or videographers, or however you would say that word, and even poets. I can see this. Come on, how did you collaborate with a culinary artist? And what is a culinary artist? I'm intrigued.
Yes. Yes. Well, a culinary artist is my turn of phrase for referring to someone who takes their passion of, food and the culinary world very seriously. I've heard chefs refer to themselves as this, and I thought, what, that's fair. If it's someone and they've committed their life to it, that is an art form. And so with Elevate, to give a little extra context, I founded this group with a goal in mind, which was, I need conducting experience. I want to be able to hire my friends and provide more work for the local scene. And I want to connect with audiences my age. And I started, I founded Elevate at the age of 24. And living in San Francisco, the majority of the population were millennials from the tech and finance worlds, right? Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
and so I thought, I want to connect with these people. And so I made that my goal. And I put together an advisory board, and I had people who were in the tech world, but had grown up playing in a youth orchestra. They went between the arts and, science and tech. They went tech for their careers, but their passion they still had for so I brought all these people in knowing that they could invite their friends to my concerts, and maybe I can connect. And this became my reality. My core demographic were 35 years of age or younger, and not in classical concert goers. So I had this sort of like what I think a lot of our industry is desperate to try and connect with. That was my core demographic.
Brilliant.
Which was brilliant, and provided its own challenges as well. Explaining to a 25-year-old who just paid $50 to come to a house concert you did that included a tapas menu paired with the chamber works, to then go, can you donate to our organization? They go, wait, I just gave you $50. What do you mean? Like explaining to millennials what philanthropy is, And so that became the big challenge for me. Was while I have all the young people, I don't have older people who have retired who understand the value of philanthropy. And so for me, fundraising became a different thing. I could sell out shows, but then those young people wouldn't necessarily be donors. And but so to circle back around, I started a concert series, part of our season each year, doing house concerts in beautiful homes, old Victorian homes throughout the city. And I would have, 2 to 3 sets of chamber music, and going along and in between and paired with, I worked with an extraordinary chef, Eric Chow was his name, who worked with a really famous restaurant and pastry shop there called Tartine Bakery. And basically he wanted to find an outlet to stretch his culinary creative muscles. And so the performances became that for him. And so he got to experiment. And so I'd send him the program. He'd listen. I'm not saying it's one of these where it's like, it can be kind of BS. Let's be honest. If someone goes, we're pairing this wine and this to this piece, but he thought about it. He was at least listening to the music when he was putting together a program. So we weren't selling it as, this, this tapas menu is brilliantly executed with the, and paired with this piece, but he had that music in mind. And so our events became not just concerts. And that was kind of what I was excited about, was the chance to explore how can I get an audience excited about a quote classical concert without it being quote a classical concert. So I had people that would show up because they knew the chef, or they loved the restaurant that he worked with, or on a program that I worked with a local photographer, I had people from the local historical societies who loved this photographer's work show up, and they had no idea who I was, who Elevate Ensemble was, who Stravinsky was. Like they didn't know anything else. They were showing up for this other artistic, endeavor that we were working with. And so our audiences became quite unique. And then if they enjoyed the experience, they were very much open to coming back for something else, because they were already not coming for the music. So I didn't have to worry about like, you have to do all Mozart because our audience is going to enjoy contemporary music. Like they were open to everything. In some ways, it didn't matter what I programmed. It just mattered how I sold their night out on the town. And I think that's an important thing that I think all of us in the industry can use is we're not selling a concert, we're selling a night out on the town. And these days we have so much to compete with. The one observation, and then I'll stop talking on this, but you can tell I'm very excited about this. I think for me, one of the most unfortunate shifts in how young people, I would say in particular, choose to plan their weekends or their off time came when, in the middle of all this, when I was running Elevate, when Facebook changed, when you created an event and you could, invite people and they could say going, not going, maybe.
Interested. Yeah.
Yes. They switched it to interested in.
Yes.
And so people could be non-committal and then last minute go, it's an hour until that show, but what else is going on? My friend's having a party. There's this other rock show. There's this restaurant that just opened. And so people stopped committing. There were, and so from the start for me, I wasn't subscriptions. That was a failure. One-off concerts was the way to go for me, and how we sold tickets, because young people weren't interested in committing to 5 or 6 programs throughout a year. It was a lot more spur of the moment.
Yeah. Well, I can say categorically that you piqued my interest, because as you were talking about, people coming to concerts, and they were going because of the person that, you'd booked, whether it be the chef or whether it be a photographer or whatever else, my creative juices started flowing. I'm thinking, well, who could we invite in Birmingham, and who could we get in? What sort of evenings could we do? And this is incredible. And so I can see why people of that age thought it was amazing, and why they followed you, and you had a following. My question was slightly flippant, asking about culinary artists, because I sort of knew what you were doing, but it's a wonderful and very interesting way of thinking about concert giving. And I've argued for years, when people talk about why aren't people coming to concerts compared to the 1980s, your 50 quid in your back pocket on a Friday night could be spent in so many more ways now than it could be in 1986. There are so many different ways. Every city in the world has got more food places, more bistros, more bars. You've got Netflix. You've got, you don't even have to leave your house, and you can have all sorts of things entertain you. You've got to try and prize that 50 quid out of their back pocket in your direction, or $50. And I think people have to work harder at doing that and finding ways of doing it. And it sounds like you really did. I'm assuming Elevator stopped. Now you've moved the other side of the country, and if so, are you thinking of doing Elevator 2?
Yeah, I did have to bring things to a close when I moved across the country. But at the moment, I don't have plans to start something new. But what I found is that the skill sets I acquired, and particularly as I'm now in a different stage and I'm interviewing for other higher role conducting positions, music director of some smaller regional orchestras, that this becomes the thing that they fixate on in interviews. Because once again, it was so far left field. And that's the luxury of starting your own group, is you don't have an institution that has a history that has decades or a century or more of history. As we know, it can be, our industry can be very slow to change. And I could turn on a dime and try something and it flops, and I go, cool, I guess we're not doing that. Or let's tweak that again and we're going to try it again. And everyone's on board. So at the moment, I don't plan on starting something new, but I know how to do it. The blueprints are there, and there's a beauty to that. Or I can take certain aspects and apply it to a more traditional institution. And that's sort of my hope moving forward as a conductor, that I can add value to other orchestras by bringing in what I learned and experimented with on my own on the small scale and expand it into a larger institution.
New scores, we all have to learn them. And you're at a stage, I'm going to call you a young conductor. I don't know how old you actually are, but in conducting years, fairly young, you've got a lot of repertoire to learn. How do you go about it? Do you sit at your desk, inner ear, big to small, small to big, first page to last, or whatever? And of course, the important question: scribble it in or not scribble it in? Red, blue, and black highlighters, or completely virginally white? What's your process?
Yeah, I definitely am in a stage where I'm learning a tremendous amount of music. Once again, being a cover conductor for an entire season with one group alone is just, it's overwhelming. It's frankly, it's too much. We all know what that entails, which is you have to learn how to prioritize as well. What am I going to learn? Yes. To what level of depth will I jump into some of this repertoire? But for me, I will always do a couple. I love using recordings. Anyone who says very old fashioned, like you don't use a recording, to me is missing out on the most important opportunity they have to learn. Mm-hmm. So I listen to a tremendous amount of recordings, and I like to give several listens, like maybe 2 or 3 listens to different performances, different conductors, orchestras, time periods, and just follow along with the score first. That's step one. If I have the luxury. If it's contemporary music, I'm obviously a lot more limited. Or if it's a premiere, I have a MIDI file, maybe. If I'm lucky, I can listen to beautiful MIDI sounds. But I'll listen a few times, not mark anything. And then I am a big marker upper of scores. Yeah. And so I use red for cues, blue for dynamics, and then I do green for phrase structure. Okay. And then I use black for any other indications I feel like putting in there. But I definitely am a scribbler, and I go through and do those basics, get the skeletal structure, get the cues, get some dynamic things. And I just spend a tremendous amount of time. I like to sing through a lot of it.
Yeah.
I don't pull out the trumpet as much, but I actually sing through individual parts, which I really enjoy. And singing's become such a crucial way of internalizing scores for me now. I can sit at a piano and, I'll plunk out some chords and things, but piano I picked up at a later age. So I'm not the old school, like sit down and reduce a score sight reading. That's not me. And I'm not going to, at this stage, if I wanted to dedicate the time to building my piano chops, I feel like I could be better using it, internalizing scores in ways that are already more natural.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it definitely gets messy, and then it's just layers. And the way I describe it to friends or maybe even to people who aren't as familiar with the enigma that is being a conductor, how do you learn a score? I know that I'm getting to a good place when things just sort of pop off the page, and I may have been spending weeks with a score, and then all of a sudden I go, oh my God, that has to be so much more timid on that second repetition of that. And it's just like so glaringly obvious, things pop out. Yeah. And I just allow these things to keep happening. And I also spend a lot of time then. I do step away from recordings. I think that's really important as well, but I will always refer back to recordings, too. It's opened up possibilities for me that I would have never thought of. So
yeah, I mean, in any other field, in any other, discipline, going back to cookery, I'm sure today's modern chefs go back and see how the last generation of chefs cooked something, or going back to Escoffier, photographers will go and look and see how Ansel Adams took photographs, and architects look at Frank Lloyd Wright. Why shouldn't we listen to recordings of Toscanini and Stokowski and Furtwängler and whoever? It would be stupid not to do that. It's arrogance.
Amen.
So, yeah.
Amen.
Oh, good. We agree. Excellent. If you are new to this podcast, you may not know that there is another way you can learn about conductors and conducting by subscribing to my Patreon page. You can hear interviews with musicians, composers, soloists and managers, and hear their thoughts on conductors and conducting. You can read my diaries when I guest conduct. You can take part in group meetings with other like-minded fans of this podcast. You can read articles on conducting and conductors, and also see videos of the great conductors of the past. You can even have conducting lessons from myself. All of this is available at patreon.com/A Mic on the Podium, and from just £5 a month, which is less than a pint of beer in most places, you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on the world of conductors and conducting. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Chad Goodman. Chad, as somebody who's listened to a few episodes, you will know what's coming. It's the 10 questions, and you will also know that I start with what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
So one of my favorite sounds is the sound of a busy restaurant. I love the sound of silverware and utensils, glasses clinking, people laughing and talking. I think it's a beautiful background noise. It really puts me at ease.
Yeah. And it seems to make dinner go down better when everybody seems to be having a good time.
Exactly.
Indeed.
Exactly. And a least favorite sound for me, motorcycles, motorbikes. I get enraged when someone has this muffler that is just so blaringly loud. Obviously we're all very sensitive as musicians. I'm sure sirens or something that comes up frequently or something like that. But my blood boils a bit when there's a motorcycle that's unnecessarily loud. Like I enjoy cars, but I think when it's obvious that they've done some modifications to make it even more obnoxious, that gets on my nerves.
I was blissfully unaware that people did this until a friend of mine briefly had an Aston Martin DB9, which is a very, very, very nice sports car. And I happened to go with him to an Aston Martin day out. There were something like 450 Aston Martins in a field in the middle of England. And during that day, he paid for somebody to install a switch onto his dashboard that could turn off the silencer in his exhaust, so that the engine noise was even louder below a certain rev counter. I thought, so you can pay money to make a really loud noise. So people must be doing this with everything. The amount of noise, I mean, I've said it before the podcast, we live on a dead straight road, and they seem to be hitting maximum revs as they pass our house. Annoying noise. Next one. If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Going on a nice walk. I really enjoy that. Some people are avid runners. I've never enjoyed running personally. It feels like way too much work, but I can walk for hours and hours. Yeah. I love doing that. And then enjoying a nice outdoor barbecue with friends, just enjoying food and company and being outdoors, whether it's by a beach like here in Miami, or perhaps in the woods somewhere beautiful in forests, but just spending time in nature with good food and good people.
I'm nodding because of the good food, and I chuckled a bit when you said you didn't like running. I've always found I loved running. I love running when I'm running in to bowl a cricket ball, or when I used to play five-a-side football, the run through to try and score a goal or whatever. But yeah, just running for recreation, no, definitely not me. No, I'll happily walk for hours, but running, definitely not. No. Number 4. Who would be a favourite conductor of yesteryear?
So favorite conductors, unfortunately, it's more recent of yesteryear, but I absolutely love Maris Janssen's recordings. I've learned so much from Maris Janssen's performances. I unfortunately never had the opportunity to see Maris performing live, but he's someone I've really admired. I'll throw in what everyone does. Carlos Kleiber would be extraordinary. But then the several episodes I've listened to, I haven't heard anyone mention yet, but Gustav Mahler.
I'm not sure anybody's mentioned him.
As in someone who I'd love to talk with, when it's that I admire, and, maybe it's not something where it's like admiring recordings and things like that, but a conductor of yesteryear, I think what an extraordinary person that would be to speak with about music. And as you and I and all of us who love music know, he was far more successful, for the majority of his career as a conductor. He was such an important figure. I think it would be incredible to spend time learning from him.
I think you're right. I don't think anybody's mentioned his name as a conductor of yesteryear. I know that there was an episode earlier on where we discussed his 10th Symphony and the second movement, the reconstruction by Derek Cook. And I've put a Patreon mini episode up about that movement. And it's all basically to do with the theory that, he was the greatest conductor on the planet and wanted to show how good he was because there's so many meter changes in that movement. But no, I don't think anybody's given an answer. So thank you. Brilliant. I wonder whether question 5 is difficult for you or not difficult for you. Some people complain about it. Favorite current conductor or conductors?
Yeah, I maybe it's because I'm in the younger conductor category right now, but that I could see maybe if that being challenging for some of the bigger names. But for me, I'm very happy to share. I can think of several who I really admire. My mentor here, Michael Tilson Thomas, I think is one of the most brilliant musical minds, just minds in general, I've ever met. I've learned so much from him, and I just what he's done musically, what he's done for community building. As a side note, I just assisted him for 2 weeks. He was conducting in San Francisco, and he's been, the last few months he had brain surgery over the summer, and these were like his first performances back, after only several months and going through treatments and all of that. And watching this man walk out for 2 weeks of programs, the audience in San Francisco, where he was, director for so long, he got instant standing ovations the second he walked out. But it was just hearing the love that this community had for him. I was sitting in different places throughout the hall every night. Yeah. And this isn't just like upper class, the donors, the board members, the fill in the blanks. It's just people of all walks of life who are standing up, whistling, shouting, "We love you, MTT. We're so glad you're healthy." Like, he changed that community. The San Francisco music scene is forever changed because of him. So that's something I aspire to do in the future if I have the luxury of of being a music director. It's really being a member of the community. And so for that, I admire him so much. Other conductors, Susanna Malki, I think is extraordinary. I got to share a program and conduct on a program with her several months ago here in Miami, and it was just life-changing, and just spending time talking with her about music. Manfred Honeck as well, I think, is absolutely brilliant. Just the level of dedication to his music. I remember assisting him in San Francisco, and he was doing Dvorak 8, which I don't know how many thousands of times he has performed that. His score that he used, literally the binding had disintegrated. So it would be, I'd be sitting in his dressing room, we'd be talking, balance notes or this or that. And he would just be turning pages, and the pages are just not connected at all. And just to see someone who cared that much about standard repertoire that he's been doing for so long was incredible. So I guess those are a few of the names that come to mind.
Well, I agree with Honeck. I played for him, and the passion he brings to pieces that other conductors, or especially orchestras. Dvorak 8, Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, I remember playing for him. And you're going to stand in front of an orchestra who everybody's played it countless times, and they're sitting there going, well, go on then, make this one interesting. And he always does, and he always did, and he brings his passion and level of detail and to it all. Brilliant choice. What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
It was a work by Charles Ives called 3 Pieces for Theater or Chamber Orchestra.
Ooh, I don't know this.
Catchy title, right?
Yeah, exactly. Trips off the tongue.
And it is one of those works that, of course, it's got the wonderful polytonality that we associate with Ives, but the different sections of the orchestra or ensemble are all in different meters, and meters that don't make sense. So when you're even just trying to call, let's go back to rehearsal A, that might be 2.5 beats into the timpani part, which is a downbeat for the violins. It's one of these where the structure is so disjointed that even just something as simple as running, it's not simple. Running a rehearsal is the hardest thing about any performance. But running a rehearsal and even just finding places to go back to became a challenge. And so it was just one of those where you're always having to shut off part of your brain, not look at certain parts of the score because it might throw you off. And I mean, something we go through as conductors that we know is on a simple example, maybe you have a 5/8 meter and it's 2 + 3 for the majority of the ensemble, but 3 + 2 is the grouping for a few others. You know that those few others are not going to get what they need. This piece was consistently, no one's getting what they need because there's too much happening.
Yeah. I've been in those positions where, you say to the orchestra, look, I'm beating this 2 + 3. And I've actually sat down and worked it out, and it's for 63% of you. This is helpful. So I'm sorry for the other 37%. You have to make a decision somewhere along the line. But if nobody's getting what they want, that's not helpful. I remember playing in the Ives' Fourth Symphony. I was on the back desk of the seconds, myself and a very dear colleague of mine, Byron, and he had a solo in one bit. But we were off stage in the first movement, back on for the second movement where he had his offstage, his back desk solo. And then we weren't in the third, and then we had to walk off again to play off stage in the fourth. Meanwhile, there's 2 pianos, there's 2 conductors, it's crazy music. I've done very little Ives. I think I've done one piece. The Yale-Princeton football game, which was bonkers anyway. But that sounds interesting. I'd love to see that score.
Yeah, it's wild. I'll send it to you. But I love Ives, actually. I'm really drawn to his music, which it's fortunate for me that I get to be working with MTT, who's such a champion of the works of Ives. So his Third Symphony I adore. So much is so many of his pieces I really, really care for. But this one was challenging to a point that it was one of those where, for me personally, the amount of work and stress didn't justify the means of the end result. So if that one stays on the shelf for the rest of my life, I'm okay with that.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Okay, this is where everyone gets to learn our mutual nerdy
Ooh.
passion, which for me would be not one, but I would need to be traveling with 2 wristwatches. I would need a dress watch and a sport watch.
Yeah. Well, you know, as you well know, because we met over a Zoom call and we talked about, you know, conducting for about 5 minutes and then spent another hour talking about watches, collecting, buying, selling. Yeah, I mean, I often travel with 2 watches as well, but that's because I like to swap them around. I don't like to wear the same watch every day. I'm not a dress watch wearer, but I will travel with a GMT watch. I suspect I know the answer to this. If you're going on one of your walks after a rehearsal, and I will often go out of my way to go via a watch shop to look in the window, especially if I know that if they sell a specific brand or two.
Oh, yes. Yeah. If I'm in another city for work, I will look up what are the watch dealers that are here. And I make that part of my day off or my time off.
Yeah. And do you have a watch that you like to wear in rehearsal? Well, not wear. Do you take them off? I take mine off and put it on the stand.
So for rehearsals, I will always take them off. What I've done recently, the last 3 weeks that I've been conducting here in Miami, I've been wearing it's late 1960s or early 70s Omega, little gold dress watch that my mom had found at like an estate sale or a yard sale, flea market, fill in the blank with whatever term you use for these types of sales. And it was in like a bag of costume jewelry that she bought for $5.
Wow.
And it had this watch, and the watch had been serviced. I took it in and they're like, it's been serviced within the last few years. So I don't know what happened, but I have this beautiful watch that my mom gave to me, which is very important. And it's so thin. It's a hand wound. So for those listening, if you want to turn things off to hear to not hear about watch talk, but because it's manual wound versus an automatic, it gets to be it's a much thinner watch, and so you forget that you're even wearing it. So the last 3 weeks I've worn that while performing, and it's been just fine. But I usually do not wear a watch. You know,
I mean, going back to actually conducting, I think it's quite important not to wear a watch. And to put it on your music stand. Musicians often see conductors looking down at their score and at their music stand. What they don't particularly want to see is the conductor looking at their watch, especially if there's 15 minutes of rehearsal to go, and you feel that he or she has probably run out of things to rehearse, and then they look at their watch and then they suddenly find something to fill up the time. That used to drive us insane. And so, but if the watch is on the stand, you know, and I have pretty clear watches. I either wear a Tudor Pelagos or my Panerai, and I can see the time instantly. Nobody's seeing me look at the time; they're seeing me look down at the score. So I can judge, especially if you're in a tight rehearsal schedule. I can judge how much time I've got left or how much time I haven't got left. I think to put it on your wrist and conduct, you actually have to turn your wrist, look at it, and everybody can see that you're looking at the time. And I think that's not necessarily a good piece of body language.
That's such a great point, Mike. There's just, as you know, in the field of conducting, there's so many ways to lose respect of the orchestra, to lose the ensemble, and something as subtle as that. Yeah, you're definitely right. I think that's a great point. Never, and I never do in a rehearsal. Like I said, for a performance where you're running through, I'm not looking at my watch, but you know, you forget it's on. If it's a thin enough dress watch, you don't even know you're wearing a watch. Yeah. So,
One final watch thing I'll comment on is that when I played, you know, I like the look of the watches I own. I love looking at them. Often I'll look at them twice when I'm looking at the time. Once because I look at it to see what the time is, look at it and go, oh, that's gorgeous. Then 30 seconds later think, oh, I forgot to look and see what the actual time was. And so I'd look at it again. But when I was playing, I would always turn the face of the watch away from me against the music stand. So I didn't know what the time was in the rehearsal, which used to drive my desk partner, dear Graham, if you listen, who's now retired. He used to drive him mad. And he used to say that time always went backwards in rehearsals. He hated rehearsing. So, you know, he would often say to me a goodly while into the rehearsal on a Monday morning, he said, what do you think the time is? And I'd say, I think it's probably 20 past 11. We're approaching the break. And he said, oh, no, it's 5 past 11. He always felt that it was always the worst case scenario. And so I bought him a gift once, which I know he treasured because I knew he wore it on a regular basis. I bought him one of these watches where all of the numbers were in reverse and the hands went backwards. So, and he actually learned to tell the time off this thing. He could tell the time off this watch, which basically went backwards and was built backwards. Because to him rehearsing, the time was standing still and going backwards.
That's such a brilliant gift. That's such a brilliant gift. I'm sure he loved that. Wow.
What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I would love for there to be more of a community aspect with the orchestra. There's always that invisible line or wall that separates the conductor from the ensemble, and which maybe in some ways is necessary. After all, you are being their leader and their director.
Yeah.
But I think it was a fascinating thing to go from playing trumpet professionally to conducting professionally, where when you're the musician, the camaraderie is naturally with all of the other musicians. At your breaks, at the intervals, you're always chatting with the other musicians. But at least from all of my experience as a conductor, you spend your breaks with the administrative staff. You're chatting with the artistic department, or a VP or an executive director, and there's sort of, even backstage, there's sometimes these invisible walls where the musicians don't even cross to another part of the hallway, where it's mostly administrative or the conductor and the soloist. And so I think it would be nice to find a happier middle ground of really building friendships with the musicians. And this might be, or it's not might, this definitely would have to do with the personality of the conductor. I mean, if it's someone, I'm a naturally very, very extroverted person, and I enjoy getting to know people and making friends. So it might come easier. It might be more possible for me than for someone who's a bit more reserved and is there and exclusively is just, I'm here to direct the music and that's it. But I'd like to see more of that moving forward if possible.
You're right to say that there's a line there, and I like to be sociable, and I like to go out for meals with people. I like to sit down and have a couple of pints with people, but I would never ever presume. I would never go and ask a player, "Oh, should we go for a beer?" or whatever. I always wait for them to ask me. So I mean, I was recently in Trondheim, and we got off the coach having done one of the concerts in one of the outlying towns of Trondheim, and a couple of the players come up to you and said, "We're going for a beer. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Oh, brilliant. Yeah, wonderful." And I also went to dinner at one of the players' houses because I got to know them as a friend. But I never, ever presume, because in the end, you're the interloper in their life. You're there for 1 week. They've got their own lives to lead. They've got their own things to deal with. I think it's different as a music director. When you live in the place, you can form greater friendships. And even call people friends and invite them over. But I think when you're guesting, it's really tough, and you should never expect anything. That orchestra in Trondheim, I have a great friend there who I first knew when I was 15 or 16. We played in the same county youth orchestra together. But I would never ever expect for us to meet up, because he's got his own life. He lives there all the time. I just turn up 1 or 2 weeks a year and sort of maybe we can meet, but if we don't, we don't, because and you should never expect it as a guest conductor ever. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do, and it's a strange thing that I can immediately agree with that, but it is true. Like you said, to not assume that this is something that I like what you said of way, if the musician asks, that's great. But because there's all these other pressures that come with that. Do they feel like, are they going to feel obligated? Like, I have to now, he's the conductor this week. I can't say no to this. Or like there's so many more layers just based on the natural hierarchy of the work.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I mean, it's looking back, when Andrew Litton would come and I was still playing in the orchestra, whilst also being assistant and associate, I would ask him out for dinner, and there was always a resounding, "Yeah, where are we going?" So yeah, if he lives by the same rules as me and he waits for the players to ask, no wonder he was so happy to go out for a meal. Because I am whenever I'm asked. It's lovely. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Yeah, I think. Though I imagine I could be successful in some other fields. I think I could be very successful in sales of just about anything, which I think, once again, we're conductors. We have to be able to talk and connect. I don't think I could allow myself to be in something that was not the creative arts or tied in some way. I think being a visual artist, being a painter could be something I'd be intrigued. It's actually something I picked up during the pandemic. At the start of the pandemic, I like so many of our colleagues, sort of backed away. I wasn't studying scores profusely. And, I took a step back and I started exploring all these other creative outlets. I started writing poetry, which I did obsessively. I went through these phases. I realized 2-month phases, if I want to call it that. I wrote poetry like very consistently for 2 months. And then I painted for the first time, like seriously paint, of course, when you're a child, you do this, in art classes, and I did a whole series of works actually, just sort of through the lens of being a musician. And I enjoyed it so much. And I've learned a lot recently through my girlfriend who works in the visual art world as an art advisor and curator. I've learned so much about the visual arts scene. And I'm really drawn to so much of it. I've always been excited. I've always loved going to museums and learning about artists, and of course, seeing the connections to musicians throughout history. But I think I would get great satisfaction out of being an artist or pursuing that. So once again, another career that has no sense of stability for the majority. But if not that, in looking at things, immediately my passion for watches is just tremendous over these last few years. So maybe watch design, if I could go into the design end of things, I think could be really gratifying for me personally.
Question 10. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
So for me, it comes down to, I think, from episodes I've listened to of your podcast, I think something that's maybe more common, which is comfort food, I think is how I would classify the majority of meals that people say. I think the most I've heard was like spaghetti and meatballs or something like that. And for me, it would be pizza. It would be from a particular place. There's a pizzeria in a small beach town in the state of Delaware that I would go to for holidays every summer with my family, a place called Rehoboth Beach. And there's a place called Grotto's Pizza. And it's one of my favorite things in the world. And it's simple. A Michelin star restaurant sounds great too. If we're talking last meal, I think comfort is what it's all about. So for me, it would be a pizza, plain cheese pizza from Grotto, and a Coca-Cola in a glass bottle. This is a very specific thing. Here in the States, at least, they refer to it a lot of times as a Mexican Coke, because they're imported where they're made with cane sugar and not with high fructose corn syrup like you get in cans and plastic bottles here, at least in the States. So as simple as it gets, pizza and a soda. That would be it. I'd be happy.
Well, there's nothing on the planet quite like a properly cooked pizza. I had one only last week when I was in Trondheim at a place, very similar name, Pizza Grano, it was called. Wood-fired. It was all about the crust, simple toppings. I'm salivating talking about it. And actually, there is something about a Coke from a glass bottle, that old-fashioned feeling. It's a wonderful choice, really wonderful choice. And it's been a wonderful hour, Chad. I've really, really enjoyed it. I hope in the future that we will actually meet up and continue chatting. I guarantee you it probably will be about conducting for about 10 minutes, and then it'll probably be about watches for the rest of the time. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you very soon.
Yeah, I can't wait. It will happen. Looking forward to that, Mike.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with an English conductor who's guest conducted all over the world, conducting in the concert hall as well as opera and ballet. She was taught by the great Russian pedagogue Ilya Musin, and she is co-founder and artistic director of Women Conductors with the Royal Philharmonic Society, a groundbreaking programme to encourage women into conducting. But until then, bye-bye.